Thank you. I am honored to be here to speak to you, to the loved ones who supported you, and to the faculty, the staff, the administration, and the alumni who made your education possible. When I was a law professor, we thought that our job was to teach students to think like a lawyer. Indeed, at the end of every semester, when I taught civil procedure, I would talk to my students about what thinking like a lawyer meant. I would say, and I'll just say before I say this may not be how all of you think about what lawyers are, but I would tell my students, thinking like a lawyer meant thinking like a human being who is tolerant, sophisticated, pragmatic, critical, and engaged. It means combining passion and principle, reason and judgment. When I became dean of Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School, which is a peer school of yours out on the Eastern Periphery, I wondered what the equivalent was for a school of public and international affairs. So I asked students to fill in the blank that we were teaching them to think like a what? So there was lots of pondering, and a fair number came back, and they were kidding, but not entirely kidding, with thinking like a bureaucrat. Not inspiring, but I do think it's worth emphasizing these days when our rule of law often seems to be in question, that bureaucrats are the guardians of the rules and the procedures that make government possible over communities that are so large that a personal knowledge of one another is impossible. But still, I think the better answer was thinking like a policymaker. And what is that? Because I have to tell you, and you all probably already know this, that beyond the confines of state capitals and schools like this one, if you go out and tell people, I'm a policymaker, it's not readily apparent what is meant. And so a policymaker is generally defined as a government official whose job it is to formulate and advocate and adopt a set of principles and strategies to achieve a public goal. So if the aim is to combat climate change, then policymakers think about what should those policies be. That could be a carbon tax, that could be a cap and trade system, that could be geoengineering, or it could be lots of little strategies designed to create incentives to conserve energy. But policymaking is a very top-down process. It also assumes a prescribed sequence. Policymakers research the landscape of theory and of data. They analyze the data that they uncover. They formulate a prescribed course of action, and then they try to communicate that to government officials, legislatures, or the executive, who can then pass a law or adopt a regulation or conduct themselves in lots of ways that can make things happen. They can enforce the laws, or they can not enforce the laws, and they can adopt all sorts of behaviors. Once that law or regulation is implemented, then you go and see what the impact is, and you hope that it's connected to what you intended it to be. You often find unintended consequences, and after the process of monitoring and evaluation, the whole thing starts over. So the first thing I want to tell you today is that that process of policymaking is too slow and too distant from the people it is meant to help. And focusing only on policy risks missing the bigger and broader enterprise of public problem solving. That's really why all of you are here and why all of us on this side of the dais are here. We want to make the world a better place, and to do that, we have to tackle the problems that affect society as a whole. Public problem solving engages not just government, but all three sectors, public, civic, and private, It's not just about ideas. It's about participation, implementation, evaluation, and experimentation. And it's bottom up as much as top down. It also crosses many disciplines, not just law and economics and politics, but history, sociology, psychology, science, engineering, and management. As you're graduating, a new practice of public problem solving is emerging. And what I want to do in the rest of my time with you is to describe some of the elements of that new practice. So the first is that it engages citizens in the process of formulating the policies that affect them, and equally important, it puts people at the center of that design process, and many of you will have studied human-centered design. We often focus on policy in terms of the big idea, the carbon tax or universal health care, and ideas are critically important, but we don't do nearly enough to include the people that those ideas are supposed to affect. And we don't have established channels and ways of engaging those people. So in President Obama's administration, after the healthcare.gov debacle, the president called in technologists to help him with the website, but that then led to the creation of the United States Digital Service, which brought engineers, computer scientists, project managers, design thinkers into government. And though that service, which continues, worked with agencies across the government to try to improve the delivery of services. But as they looked at the delivery of services across the government, their founding principle was build with, not for. We cannot see ourselves as designing policy and practice for people. It has to be with people. It has to be a government of, by, for, and with the people. So the second thing that the new practice focuses on is finding and replicating rather than making. And again, I'm a long-standing academic. I believe in coming up with new ideas and concepts, and some of that can be absolutely exhilarating. But actually, if you look across this country, and it's a big country and it's a diverse country, somewhere out there, local innovators are figuring out and testing solutions to most of our public problems. I encourage you to scout for solutions before inventing them, to be curious about what is out there happening, what works and what doesn't. So there's a book, and now I speak to all the family members and friends present. This is what I would recommend as a graduation present. Just wait till I've stopped talking before ordering it, please. So there's a book by James Fallows and Deborah Fallows called Our Towns, A 100,000-Mile Journey into the Heart of America. It published just this week. James and Deb Fallows spent 5 years flying a small plane, and I mean a really small plane, a plane small enough to have a parachute, not for them, but for the plane, all over the country. 5 years, they went to 50 towns. These were small and medium-sized towns, sometimes small cities, talking to people and exploring, as journalists, what is happening across the country. They went to Sioux Falls, they went to Duluth in Minnesota, they went to Dodge City, to Greenville, South Carolina, to Fresno, cities across the country. And here's what they say. They start by saying that the local news is very different than the national news. The national news is terrible, but it is not all the news. They describe, after our current Gilded Age, and we are in the second Gilded Age, the national mood will change again. When it does, a new set of ideas and plans will be at hand. We've seen them being tested in towns we never would have suspected, by people who would never join forces in the national capital, but who work together at home. Their projects, the progress they have made, and their goals are more congruent than they might ever have imagined. So get out there and scout before you invent. The third element of the new practice is using data to learn, monitor, fix, and adapt. Probably the most flawed idea in policymaking is that you do it once and you're done. You create a policy, and you've created a policy until it gets reversed. That's just impossible today. Things move way too fast. And technology is changing, but also we are changing. So what we need to do is come up with a hypothesis or a tentative solution, and all babies are welcome, so. And babies cry, that's what happens. But we need to be able to try things, to monitor them in real time, to change them and improve them as we're working. That's where the use of data and knowing how to get streams of data in real time is so important. Data is always part of studies, but this isn't the studies that you research and publish. This is, again, in real time. The data about police shootings, the data about student evaluations, about water quality, about flashpoints among different groups, about food security. Having that data in real time can tell us whether what we thought was a solution is one, or if it's working, how can it work better? Fourth, and relatedly, the new practice harnesses existing technologies, but also engages technologists. Now, I do not believe that technology is the solution to all our problems. And indeed, in Washington, I talk about technology a lot. In California, I talk about policy a lot. It is not, we need both. And there are countless examples. Technology itself, like anything else, and we talk about digital technology, but tools are technology. It requires being embedded in policy, politics, and human relations. But still, if any of the problems that you want to tackle, you have to be able to take what is available technologically into account. And indeed, you don't have to look any further than Minneapolis. When I was preparing for this address, I talked to some of the people at New America about what was happening in Minneapolis, and one of the first things one of my staff members came up with is Minneapolis has a dashboard for diverse spending. You can go on the site and see immediately what tax dollars in Minneapolis are being spent on whom. On how many minorities, on how many women, on how, in fact, the city is living up to a commitment to diverse spending. Around the world, that kind of transparency is combating corruption in ways we have never seen before. Just in this year alone, you've seen major change in South Korea, in Brazil, in this week, in the Malaysian election, in Armenia, in Romania. And what is striking is that government officials are going to jail, but the government's not falling. Elections are happening, and anti-corruption campaigners are winning over corrupt governments. So harnessing emerging technologies, but equally importantly, having technologists at the table. Todd Park, who was the Chief Technology Officer for Health and Human Services, said he was brought in to fix healthcare.gov, but if he had come in at the beginning when the Obama administration was creating universal healthcare, there never would have been a healthcare.gov. He would have said from the beginning, you do not create one massive website for the country. You need people, you need engineering thinking just as we need economics, statistics, and all the other things that we learn. And finally, in our new practice of public problem solving, it's a practice that focuses on public value. Indeed, Dean Bloomberg and her co-authors have written extensively on a practice of focusing on public value. There are many definitions of public value. I'll give you one that she and her co-authors cite. Producing what is valued by the public, what is good for the public, or both. Now, we could all argue for a long time about that definition and the tensions between paternalism and representation, but the point is to ask yourself continually and ask the question, when you are doing your work, we're so engrossed in getting this paper done, in analyzing this data set, in putting something into practice, stop. Are we actually serving the public? Are we doing what we are here to do, which is to create public value? So that's the new practice of public problem solving. Engaging citizens and putting those citizens at the center of the design process, thinking about finding and replicating, scouting rather than inventing, using data to monitor, but also to fix and to adapt, harnessing technology and engaging technologists, and focusing on public value and not being afraid to ask those tough questions. So I think traditionally at this graduation, a school of public affairs named for Hubert Humphrey, who went to Washington as a senator and then as a vice president. Generally, we might say, go east, young people. But for those of you who are going to Washington, we need you. For those of you who haven't made up your mind, I'd say not so fast. I'd say go east, go west, go north, go south, spread across the country. Join the people across the country, from Louisville to Salt Lake City to South Bend to LA, who are finding solutions to public problems with the people across the country in lots of new ways. You are graduating at a time of great trouble and of great opportunity. A time of great need, which you must confront with great humility. You are also graduating at a time of great uncertainty about, if nothing else, the future of work. And I have college-age kids, so I know this directly. What jobs will continue to exist, and what skills will you need for them? But the one thing that everyone who studies the future of work agrees on is that we will need creative problem-solving skills. I promise you, across the literature. So own that, shape it, be pioneering practitioners of problem-solving, but make sure it's public problem-solving. And when Dean Bloomberg and your fellow faculty members stand up at the end of classes, at the end of the first and second year of this great school, and they say, here at the Humphrey School, we teach you to think like public problem solvers. It's up to you to fill in those blanks. Congratulations to you all.